The sun hung low over the jagged horizon of the Chiricahua Mountains, painting the high desert in shades of burnt orange and shadow. Dust devils swirled lazily across the parched earth, kicking up fine grit that stung the eyes and clung to sweat-slicked skin. It was late summer in what the white men called Arizona Territory, but to the NDE people, the Apache, this was simply home, a land that demanded respect with every blistering day and bone-chilling night. The air shimmered with heat, carrying the faint scent of creosote bushes and distant thunder that never quite broke. In a hidden arroyo, shielded by thorny mesquite and boulders worn smooth by centuries of flash floods, a small band of Chiricahua Apache had made camp. Their wickiups, dome-shaped shelters of brush and hides, blended seamlessly into the landscape, invisible to any unwary traveler. Smoke from a low fire curled upward, twisting like a serpent before dissipating into the dry wind. Women moved with quiet efficiency, grinding mesquite beans into flour on flat stones, their deerskin skirts dusted with the red earth. Children played nearby, fashioning toy bows from yucca stalks, their laughter a rare softness in the harsh symphony of the desert. Taza, a wiry man in his late 20s with sun-darkened skin etched by wind and worry, crouched at the edge of the camp, his keen eyes scanning the ridgeline. He was a scout, one of the band's best, known for his endurance on long treks and his ability to read the land like an open book. His black hair was tied back with a strip of rawhide, and around his neck hung a small pouch of sacred pollen, not for magic, but as a reminder of the old ways, the balance one must keep with the earth. Today, his face was set in a frown, deeper than the canyons below. "They're coming closer," Taza murmured to his younger brother Dago, who knelt beside him, restringing his bow. Dago, barely 18 summers old, nodded without looking up, his hands steady despite the tension coiling in his shoulders. The brothers had been out since dawn, tracking a small party of Mexican rancheros who'd been pushing north, their cattle grazing on Apache lands. Raiding was a way of life, taking what the land denied freely, but this group was bolder than most, armed with rifles stolen from American soldiers and driven by rumors of silver strikes. 5 men, maybe 6, Taza continued, his voice low and even, like the rumble of gravel underfoot. "They've got horses loaded with supplies, water skins too. We could hit them at the pass, take what we need before they reach the soldiers at Fort Bowie." Dago glanced up, his dark eyes sharp. "And if they fight? Father says we avoid the iron weapons when we can. The band's low on arrows as it is." Taza placed a hand on his brother's shoulder, feeling the lean muscle honed by years of running, climbing, hunting. Their father, old Esquiminzin, led this band with the wisdom of a man who'd seen treaties broken like dry twigs. He'd lost 2 sons to smallpox, brought by the whites, and now he preached caution over vengeance. But caution didn't fill empty bellies or slake thirst when the monsoon rains failed. "We take what we can without noise," Taza replied. "Steal the horses, the water, run them off into the Badlands. The women need that for the little ones." Across the camp their mother, Xochitl, paused in her work, her weathered hands stilling on the metat. She was a pillar of the band, skilled in weaving baskets tight enough to carry water without a drop lost, and in treating wounds with poultices of willow bark and yarrow. Her eyes, lined with the faint scars of old burns from a long-ago raid, met Taza's across the fire. No words passed, but the message was clear. Survival first, always. As the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in streaks of crimson, Taza and Dago slipped away from the camp like shadows merging with the dusk. They moved on foot, moccasins silent over the cracked earth, bodies low to avoid silhouetting against the horizon. The desert was alive with subtle sounds, the chirp of a cactus wren, the distant howl of a coyote testing the wind. Taza led, his senses attuned to every shift. The faint imprint of hoofprints in the dust, the acrid smell of horse sweat carried on the breeze. They crested a low ridge, dropping into a shallow wash where the rancheros had paused to water their mounts. The men were dismounted, laughing coarsely in Spanish, their fire crackling with stolen mesquite. Water skins hung heavy from the saddles, and a sack of cornmeal peeked from a pack. Taza's mouth watered at the thought. Corn for tortillas, water to stretch through the dry weeks ahead. "Wait here," Taza whispered to Dago, signaling with a subtle hand gesture, a code learned from boyhood games turned deadly serious. He crept forward on his belly, using the sparse cover of greasewood bushes. His heart pounded steadily, not with fear, but with the focus of the hunt. One wrong step, one snapped twig, and rifles would bark like thunder. Dago watched, bow-knocked, as Taza reached the outermost horse, a bay mare tethered loosely. With practiced ease, he sliced the rope and coaxed the animal free, leading it back into the shadows. The mare nickered softly, but the wind masked the sound. Emboldened, Taza returned for a second, then a third, each time grabbing a water skin or a handful of provisions. But on the fourth run, fate turned. A rock shifted under his foot, tumbling into the wash with a clatter like bones rattling. One of the rancheros jerked upright, his hand flying to his rifle. "Kianandali," he shouted, voice echoing off the canyon walls. Taza froze, then bolted, grabbing the nearest skin as he sprinted into the night. Shots rang out, sharp cracks that split the air, bullets whining past like angry hornets. Dago fired back once, his arrow finding a mark in the firelight, but then he was running too, urging the stolen horses ahead. "Run!" Taza yelled over his shoulder, the weight of the water skin slapping against his thigh. The rancheros mounted in chaos, hooves thundering as they gave chase. The brothers pushed the horses hard, weaving through the arroyo toward the mountains, but the terrain narrowed, forcing them to abandon the animals in a thicket of cholla cactus. Now on foot, with the enemy closing, Taza gripped Dago's arm. "We split. You go east to the camp, warn father. I'll draw them west, into the lava beds. They won't follow far without water." Dago's face twisted in protest. "No, brother, we stay together." Taza shoved him gently but firmly. "Go. For the band. For mother." With a nod, Dago vanished into the gloom, his form swallowed by the sagebrush. Taza turned west, lungs burning as he broke into a run across the open plain. The moon rose, silver and unforgiving, illuminating the endless stretch of desert ahead, miles of sun-baked rock, no cover, no water. His moccasins pounded the earth, each step a defiance of the thirst already clawing at his throat. Behind him, the shouts of pursuit faded, but he knew they wouldn't stop easily. The night air cooled, but the run had only just begun. Taza's breath came in measured gasps, each one a deliberate pull from the dry night air that offered no relief. The moon cast long shadows across the malpais, the jagged lava fields that stretched like frozen black waves underfoot. Sharp obsidian edges tore at his moccasins, but he didn't falter, his feet finding the path of least resistance through years of memory etched into muscle. The rancheros' shouts had faded to echoes, swallowed by the vastness, but he could still hear the distant clatter of hooves on stone, persistent like the gnawing hunger in his gut. He'd run these badlands before, as a boy chasing jackrabbits with Dago, learning the land's unforgiving lessons. Water was a ghost here, hidden in rare seeps or the bellies of prickly pear, but tonight it was the stolen skin bouncing against his hip that kept him going. It sloshed faintly with each stride, a promise for the band, though his own throat burned like sandpaper. Sweat evaporated before it could cool him, leaving salt trails on his skin that itched under the thin cotton shirt. The pursuit pressed on, fainter now, the Mexicans likely cursing the terrain that slowed their horses. Taza veered north, toward a cluster of hoodoos, tall rock spires eroded by wind and rare rains, hoping to lose them in the maze. His mind raced ahead, replaying the raid's chaos. The arrows thunk into flesh, the sting of a bullet grazing his arm, warm blood trickling down to his elbow. It wasn't deep, but pain sharpened his focus, a reminder to stay low, to blend with the night. Hours blurred into a rhythm of step and scan, the stars wheeling overhead in their eternal dance. The cold deepened as midnight passed, seeping through his clothes like icy fingers, but Taza welcomed it after the day's furnace. His legs ached, thighs burning from the climb out of the arroyo, yet he pushed on, drawing on the stories his father told around winter fires, of warriors who outran Comanches across the Llano Estacado, feet bleeding but spirits unbroken. Endurance wasn't magic, it was will, forged in the cradle of this land. By the time the first grey light of dawn streaked the eastern sky, Taza had put miles between him and the rancheros. He crested a low rise and dropped into a shallow basin ringed by junipers, their twisted branches clawing at the air like desperate hands. No sign of pursuit, but he couldn't rest yet. Kneeling behind a boulder, he uncorked the water skin and took a single careful sip, just enough to wet his cracked lips, then stoppered it tight. For the others. Always for the others. The basin offered brief shelter, a place to bind his wound with a strip torn from his shirt and a wad of dried grass for padding. The cut throbbed, but he'd seen worse. Xochitl's hands steady as she stitched gashes from arrow fights, her voice murmuring encouragement in the old tongue. He wondered if Dago had reached the camp by now, if Esquiminzin was rallying the men to scout the rancheros' retreat. The band couldn't afford a full fight, not with the soldiers at Fort Bowie itching for any excuse to push deeper into Apache country. Rising, Taza scanned the horizon. The lava gave way to rolling hills dotted with agave and yucca, the plants' spines glinting like spears in the growing light. He needed to circle back east, rejoin the band before the sun turned the world into an oven. But thirst clawed deeper now, his tongue swollen, vision blurring at the edges. He spotted a barrel cactus nearby, its green bulk a rare splash of life amid the black rock. With his knife, he sliced off the top, scooping out the pulpy flesh. It was bitter, fibrous, but the moisture seeped into him like a lifeline, buying time. As he chewed, memories flooded in unbidden. The summer his family fled a cavalry patrol, running 3 days without halt, mothers carrying babes on their backs while elders leaned on sticks. They'd survived by sharing every drop, every bite, the community's strength woven tighter than any basket. Taza spat out the tougher fibers, wiping his mouth. He wasn't alone in this. The land itself was kin, teaching through trial. The sun breached the horizon, its rays slicing through the chill like a hot knife. Heat built quickly, the air shimmering as Taza broke into a lope again, conserving energy with the efficient gait of a man born to the trail. Flies buzzed around his wound, drawn by the scent of blood, and he swatted them away without breaking stride. Far off, a hawk circled, its cry a lone note in the silence, reminding him to watch for signs. Disturbed dust, bent grass, the faint whiff of wood smoke. Mid-morning found him at the edge of a dry wash, its bed cracked like old leather. He followed it upstream, hoping for a hidden pothole where rainwater lingered. The walls rose sheer on either side, baked red by the relentless sun, and the shade offered scant mercy. His shadow shortened as the heat peaked, sweat stinging his eyes, but he pressed on, moccasins kicking up puffs of dust that coated his legs like war paint. A sound halted him, a low rumble, not thunder but hooves. Rancheros? No, too scattered. He peered over the lip, a small herd of pronghorn antelope grazing warily on sparse bunchgrass. They bolted at his movement, bounding away in graceful leaps, but not before he noted their direction, toward water, perhaps a spring in the next canyon. Taza climbed out, muscles screaming, and tailed them at a distance, using the terrain for cover. The antelope led him west again, deeper into the hills, but he trusted their instinct over his own fading strength. By noon, the sun hammered down, turning the world white-hot, mirages dancing on the flats. His vision swam, the water skin a tempting weight, but he rationed another sip, forcing himself to swallow slowly. The canyon narrowed, its floor littered with boulders tumbled from above. The antelope vanished around a bend, and Taza followed, heart lifting at the glint ahead. A tinaja, a rock pool carved by ancient floods, its surface still and deep enough to mirror the sky. He approached cautiously, checking for snake tracks in the silt, then knelt to drink, the cool water shocking his parched body. It wasn't much, but it revived him, washing away the haze. Refreshed, he filled a small gourd from his pouch, sealing the rest of the skin. The rancheros might circle back, but for now, he'd gained ground. Pushing east once more, Taza thought of Dago's face in the moonlight, the boy's reluctance to split. Brothers bound by blood and land, they'd reunite soon, stronger for the trial. The desert whispered its approval in the rustle of wind through creosote, a land that tested but never broke those who listened. As the afternoon waned, shadows lengthening across the baked earth, Taza spotted smoke on the distant ridge, faint, controlled. The camp, or enemies. He altered course, stealth his ally, the run far from over. Taza's steps slowed as he crested the ridge's shoulder, the smoke curling like a thin grey finger against the deepening blue of the sky. The sun had dipped toward the west, casting the Chiricahua's folds in elongated shadows that stretched like weary arms across the valley floor. His body protested every movement, the graze on his arm now a dull throb, his moccasins worn thin from the lava's bite, and thirst returning with a vengeance despite the Tinaja's gift. He crouched low behind a clump of bear grass, its sharp blades slicing at his palms as he peered downward. The smoke rose from a shallow depression near a cluster of cottonwoods, their leaves whispering in the cooling breeze. A rare sight in this stretch of high desert, where water's memory lingered just enough to sustain such green. Not the band's camp. Too exposed, too close to the main trail south toward Mexico. Escaminzin would never risk it. Taza's pulse quickened, not from fear, but from the sharp clarity of survival's edge. He scanned for movement. No horses, no glint of metal, just the steady plume suggesting a lone fire, perhaps a traveler, or a small group seeking respite before nightfall. He needed to pass unseen, rejoin the band before full dark swallowed the trails. Circling wide would cost hours, burning what little strength he had left, but charging ahead invited ambush. Weighing it, Taza recalled his father's words from a moonlit council. The land hides you if you ask politely. Move like the wind, not the storm. He chose stealth, slipping down the ridge's flank on hands and knees, using the scrub oak's cover. The earth here was softer, loamy from occasional runoff, and his fingers dug in for purchase. Nails caked with red dirt. As he drew nearer, voices drifted up, Spanish, low and guarded, laced with fatigue. Not rancheros from the raid. These sounded different, rougher, with the drawl of miners who'd crossed from Sonora. Taza froze, ears straining. 2 men by the timbre, one complaining of blisters, the other muttering about lost claims up near the Dragoon Mountains. Their fire crackled softly, roasting a jackrabbit over mesquite coals, the scent twisting Taza's empty stomach into knots. Waterskins lay nearby, half full, and a rifle propped against a saddle. Temptation clawed at him, but he pushed it down. Stealing now would light a new chase, and he was spent. 1 man against 2, wounded and parched. Instead, he waited, breath shallow, as the men ate in silence, the night's chill settling like a blanket over the valley. Stars pricked the sky, and the first coyote yips echoed from the east, a chorus that masked his own rustle as he edged past their camp, parallel to the cottonwoods. The ground sloped away into a dry gulch, its bed choked with tumbled rocks and thorny catclaw. He followed it, the shadows deepening, his mind turning to Dago. Had the boy made it back? Warned the women to break camp and move to the hidden spring. The thought of Xochitl's steady gaze fueled him, a quiet fire against the cold. The gulch widened into a flat expanse of creosote flats, the bush's resinous tang sharp in his nostrils. Moonlight silvered the leaves, turning the desert into a sea of silver waves. But the run demanded more now, sustained, relentless, as the rancheros might yet loop back under cover of dark. Taza broke into his lope again, a steady rhythm, heel to toe, breathing deep from the diaphragm to ward off the stitch building in his side. His legs, hardened by years of herding sheep across these very plains, carried him forward, but fatigue gnawed like a persistent rat. Each mile blurred, the landscape repeating in monotonous cruelty. Endless flats giving way to low rises, then back to flats, the horizon mocking with its unchanging line. Thirst hit hardest in the night's quiet, his mouth a desert within a desert, lips cracked and bleeding faintly. He rationed another sip from the skin, the water tepid now, tasting of hide and dust. It wasn't enough. He needed the band's knowledge, the women who knew where to find the seeps in split rocks or the dew that gathered on yucca leaves at dawn. Alone he was vulnerable, but the Apache way was woven into him. Observe, adapt, endure. He thought of the long migrations his grandparents spoke of, fleeing Navajo raiders across the San Simon Valley, families linked arm in arm, sharing tales to distract from blistered feet and hollow bellies. A distant rumble pulled him from reverie. Thunder, real this time, rolling in from the south. Monsoon remnants, perhaps, the storms that could bless or curse with flash floods. Taza angled toward it, hoping for rain to mask his trail and fill the arroyos. The air grew heavier, charged with the metallic scent of impending wet, and fat drops began to patter, sizzling on the dry earth like grease on a hot stone. He tilted his face upward, letting them splash his skin, cool rivulets tracing paths through the grime. It wasn't a downpour, but enough to ease the fire in his throat. He opened his mouth, catching what he could, the water tasting of sky and stone. The rain quickened his pace, mud slicking the ground into a treacherous slide, but he navigated it with the surety of one who'd danced through worse. Lightning forked overhead, illuminating a familiar landmark, the twisted spire of Dos Cabezas, twin peaks that marked the band's eastern boundary. Home was close now, maybe 5 miles, but the storm's fury built, wind whipping the creosote into frenzy. Visibility dropped, sheets of rain blurring the world, and Taza sought shelter in a shallow overhang, its rock lip dripping like a leaky roof. There, huddled against the damp wall, he bound his wound tighter with fresh grass, the rain's chill seeping into his bones. Shivers racked him, but he welcomed the cleanse. It washed away the blood's scent, the sweat's betrayal. In the flashes, he spotted movement below. Shadows in the downpour, horses perhaps, or men on foot. Rancheros, miners. He couldn't tell, but instinct screamed evasion. Waiting out the worst, Taza planned his final push. Skirt the peaks at dawn, use the storm's aftermath to cover his approach. As the rain eased to a drizzle, he emerged, the world reborn in muddy streams and glistening rocks. The cold bit deeper now, his wet clothes clinging like a second skin, but adrenaline surged. He ran again, the miles shrinking under his determination, each step a vow to the band, to Dago, to the land that shaped them. The smoke from earlier was a fading memory, ahead lay reunion or reckoning, but Taza met it head-on, unbreakable as the mountains themselves. By the time the storm cleared, leaving the desert steaming under a star-pocked sky, Taza's silhouette merged with the ridgeline, drawing ever closer to the hidden heart of his people. The run tested flesh and spirit, but in its forge, resilience burned bright. Taza's moccasins sank into the muddied trail as he descended the ridgeline, the storm's leavings turning the path into a slick ribbon of red clay that sucked at his steps. Dawn's first light filtered through the cottony clouds, painting the Chiricahua's eastern slopes in muted golds and greys. The air hung heavy with the scent of wet sage and upturned earth, a brief mercy after the night's deluge, but already the sun clawed upward, promising to bake the moisture away by midday. His body screamed for rest, muscles knotted like twisted rawhide, the graze on his arm pulsing with each heartbeat, but he pressed on, the water skin lighter now, its contents doled out in sips that barely dulled the ache in his throat. The twin peaks of Dos Cabezas loomed ahead, their rugged faces scarred by avalanches of loose scree, a natural barrier that funneled travelers into narrow passes. Taza knew every twist, the hidden ledge where boys once hid to spy on mule deer, the boulder-strewn chute that could avalanche with a wrong footfall. He skirted the base, weaving through a thicket of manzanita bushes, their red bark peeling like sunburned skin. Thorns snagged his shirt, drawing thin lines of blood, but he ignored them, eyes fixed on the valley beyond. The band would have moved after Dago's warning. Esquiminzin's caution demanded it, but to where? The spring in Bear Canyon, perhaps, or deeper into the mountains where the pines offered cover from patrols. A faint whinny carried on the wind, stopping him cold. He dropped to one knee behind a juniper, its branches heavy with raindrops that pattered onto the duff like hesitant footsteps. Peering through the needles, he spotted them, 3 horses grazing on the sparse aftermath of the storm, their coats matted and dark. Not wild mustangs. These were saddled, one with a frayed Apache blanket draped over its withers. Stolen, or from the rancheros? His heart thudded as he scanned for riders. None in sight, but tracks marred the mud, moccasin prints, small and light, mingled with boot heels. Dago, or scouts from another band? Caution 1. Taza circled wide, belly low to the ground, the wet earth cool against his palms. The horses lifted their heads at his approach, ears flicking, but he whistled softly, a bird call he'd used since childhood to calm the band's ponies. The nearest, tire-sturdy roan, snorted but didn't bolt. Up close he saw the signs, rawhide hobbles, a quiver slung over the saddle, arrows fletched with turkey feathers, his people's work. Relief washed over him, sharper than the Tinaja's water, but it was short-lived. No rider meant trouble, abandoned in haste likely from the raid's fallout. He untied the roan, leading it by the reins while mounting the second, a grey with a swayback that spoke of hard miles. The third he set free, slapping its flank to send it scattering into the brush. Riding now eased the burn in his legs, but the jolt of each step jarried his wound, fresh blood seeping through the makeshift bandage. He urged the grey forward at a trot, following the tracks eastward into the valley's throat, where arroyos branched like veins in the land's parched hide. The sun climbed higher, its heat evaporating the puddles, steam rising in ghostly wisps that distorted the horizon. Flies swarmed again, buzzing around the horse's eyes and his own sweat-slicked face, but he swatted them one-handed, the other gripping the reins like a lifeline. The trail dipped into a narrow defile, walls of fractured limestone rising 20 feet on either side, their faces etched with petroglyphs faded by time, hunting scenes from ancestors who'd run these same paths. Taza's mind wandered to those stories, told by firelight, how the NDE outlasted Spanish conquistadors by knowing the canyon's secrets, melting into them like rain into sand. But endurance had limits. His vision blurred at the edges, thirst tightening its grip. He dismounted to check a seep where rainwater collected in a cleft rock, cupping the murky liquid to his lips. It tasted of minerals and moss, gritty with silt, but he drank deeply, then filled the skin, the act a small victory against the desert's greed. Remounted, he pushed the horses harder, the roan trailing willingly. The defile opened onto a broad basin, dotted with cholla cactus standing sentinel, their golden spines glowing in the light. Far across, a dust plume rose, riders moving north. Soldiers from Fort Bowie? His stomach knotted. If they crossed the band's path. He spurred the grey into a canter, the wind whipping his hair free from its tie, carrying the faint tang of horse lather and his own unwashed sharpness. The miles stretched, the sun now a hammer on his shoulders, baking the mud from his clothes into a cracked mask. By late morning, the basin gave way to pinon juniper woodlands, the trees' twisted forms offering dappled shade that the horses sought instinctively. Taza slowed, ears straining for sounds beyond the creak of leather and hoofbeats. A twig snapped close to the left. He reined in, hand drifting to the knife at his belt, the bow too awkward from horseback. From the underbrush emerged a figure. Dago, disheveled and wide-eyed, bow slung over his shoulder, a fresh cut above his eye crusted with blood. "Brother!" Dago's voice cracked, relief flooding his features as he gripped the roan's bridle. "I thought the whites had you. The rancheros split. Some chased shadows west, others rode south with their dead." Taza slid down, clasping Dago's arm, feeling the tremor in the boy's frame. Up close, exhaustion mirrored his own, hollow cheeks, lips parched white. "The camp? Father?" "Moved at first light. Miners spotted our smoke, too close. We're at the spring now, women filling baskets. Mother sends word, bring water and yourself whole." Dago's eyes flicked to the wound, concern etching deeper lines than his years warranted. Taza nodded, unstoppering the skin and passing it over. Dago drank sparingly, then returned it. "We ride together, but quiet. The dust north could be trouble." They mounted up, Dago on the roan, and set off at a ground-eating lope through the woods, the pine's needles cushioning the earth like a reluctant carpet. Conversation flowed in snippets, voices low against the rustle of branches. Dago recounted his night, evading 2 rancheros on foot, hiding in a crevice till they passed, then stealing these horses from their picket line at dawn. "One saw me, fired wild. I ran till my lungs burned like you taught. Breathe with the land, not against it." Pride swelled in Taza's chest, mingling with the ache. "You did well. The band's strength is in us all." The woodlands thinned as they climbed toward the spring, the air thinning with altitude. carrying the crisp bite of higher ground. The sun beat merciless, shadows shrinking to puddles at their feet, but the horses' stamina held, bought by the band's careful breeding over generations. Thirst nipped again, but Taza ignored it, focusing on the ridge ahead, the final barrier before reunion. A shout echoed from the north, sharp and commanding, English laced with orders, cavalry. The dust plume resolved into blue-coated figures, lances glinting, horses in tight formation. They were scouting, perhaps drawn by the storm's noise or ranchero reports. Taza and Dago exchanged a glance, unspoken agreement passing between them. No time for the open trail. They'd cut through the side canyon, a risky scramble but hidden from view. Dismounting, they led the horses into the narrow slot, rocks scraping flanks as the walls closed in. The soldiers' voices faded behind, but the chase's shadow lingered, a reminder that rest was a luxury, not a right. Sweat stung Taza's eyes, his breath ragged, but with Dago at his side, the miles felt shared, the burden lighter. The spring waited, with its promise of family and fleeting peace, but the run's lesson etched deeper. In the Apache way, survival was a relay, passed from one to the next, unbreakable. As they emerged into the hidden cleft, the faint trickle of water greeted them like an old friend's call, pulling them onward through the heat's unyielding grip. The cleft narrowed like a vein in the mountain's flank, its walls slick with moss from the spring's eternal seep. Taza and Dago led the horses single file, the animals' hooves clipping softly on the damp stone, echoing in the confined space. The air grew cooler here, laced with the mineral tang of groundwater and the faint earthy rot of ferns clinging to cracks. Sunlight slanted in shafts from above, illuminating motes of dust that danced like fireflies in the dimness. Taza's shoulders relaxed a fraction, the tension of the chase easing, as the trickle grew to a steady murmur ahead. A ribbon of water threading over polished pebbles, pooling in a shallow basin ringed by willows. They emerged into a small clearing, the spring's gift sustaining a patch of green amid the juniper and pinon that hemmed the site. The band's wickiups huddled low, camouflaged with branches and hides, smoke from a concealed fire pit rising in lazy spirals. Women knelt at the water's edge, filling tightly woven burden baskets, their movements fluid and unhurried despite the urgency of relocation. Children splashed quietly in the shallows under watchful eyes, while men sharpened arrows or mended gear, their faces etched with the quiet resolve of those who'd danced with danger before. Xochitl rose first, her deerskin dress mud-spattered from the morning's hasty move, a basket balanced on her hip. Her eyes, sharp as flint, locked on Taza, taking in his bloodied arm and the weariness carving hollows under his cheekbones. "You return like the rain, late but bringing life," she said, her voice steady, laced with the warmth of unspoken relief. She crossed the clearing in quick strides, taking the waterskin from his saddle before he could dismount. Taza swung down, legs numb from the ride, and pulled her into a brief embrace, the scent of yarrow and sweat grounding him. "Enough to share, Mother. The raid went sour, but we took what we could." He glanced at Dago, who handed off the roan's reins to a waiting youth, the boy's shoulders slumping now that safety enveloped them. Eskiminzin emerged from a wickiup, his frame lean and bowed slightly by years of carrying the band's weight. Grey streaked his braids, but his gaze held the fire of a man who'd outmaneuvered bluecoats in the dragoon campaigns. "The soldiers, how close?" he asked, voice gravelly, accepting the skin from Xochitl and uncorking it to sniff the contents. "North Ridge, scouting the basin," Taza replied, rubbing the ache from his neck. "Cavalry, 10 or 12, lances out. They didn't spot us, but they'll comb the trails by noon." The old man nodded, passing the skin to a cluster of elders who murmured approval at its weight. Water was divided methodically, sips for the thirsty. The rest poured into ollas for boiling. Xochitl guided Taza to a flat rock by the spring, unwrapping his bandage with practiced hands. "This needs cleaning," she said, dipping a cloth into the cool flow. The water stung as it washed the wound, but her touch was firm, drawing out grit with a poultice of chewed prickly pear. "Dago told us of the chase. You drew them off alone, foolish, but necessary." Dago knelt nearby, accepting a gourd of water from a young woman, his cut eyes swelling shut. "He ran the Malpais all night, Father. like the stories of Victorio's scouts outpacing horses on foot. Escaminzin's lips twitched in a rare half-smile, but his eyes stayed on the ridgeline. Endurance buys time, not victory. The rancheros lost 2 men, one to your arrow, Dago, but they'll talk. Soldiers hear whispers of Apache raids and come running like dogs to scraps. We can't stay here past dusk. The spring's too vital to risk. The band stirred at his words, a ripple of activity. Women packing mesquite flour into parfleches, men checking moccasins for wear, the soft thwack of knives testing bowstrings. Taza drank from the gourd, Xochitl pressed into his hands, the water sliding down like cool silk, reviving the fire in his limbs. It was clean, unlike the Tinaja's grit, and for a moment he savored it, feeling the community's pulse in every shared drop. A child toddled over, clutching a stick horse fashioned from Ocotillo, and Taza ruffled the boy's hair, the simple touch a reminder of what they fought for. Not glory, but this fragile weave of kin and land. But peace shattered with a distant crack, rifle shot echoing from the north. The band froze, heads turning as one. Escaminzin stood, hand on his knife. Scouts, not ours. Taza was on his feet, wound forgotten, grabbing his bow from the roan. Cavalry flushing the basin. They'll hit the main trail soon. Dago strung his bow, face paling, but set. We stand. No, Escaminzin said flatly. We run, break into family groups, scatter to the canyons, regroup at the old camp in 3 Feathers Draw by moonrise. Take only what carries on your back. Chaos bloomed into order, the Apache way, mothers slinging babes to their hips, elders leaning on staffs but moving swift. Xochitl tied the filled baskets, her eyes meeting Taza's. You lead the rear. Keep the weak ones covered. I'll take the young with Dago. Taza nodded, helping an aunt hoist a heavy load, the weight familiar from migrations past. The spring's water glistened one last time as they slipped away, filing into the cleft shadows. The sun climbed mercilessly, heat radiating from the rocks like a forge, turning the air thick and oppressive. They moved south now, toward the labyrinth of side canyons that twisted like veins through the Chiricahuas, the path steep and thorn-choked. Taza brought up the rear with 2 warriors, their steps light despite the burdens, moccasins gripping the loose scree. Sweat beaded on his brow, the fresh poultice itching under the sun's glare, but he scanned the heights, ears tuned to the land's warnings, a dislodged pebble, the sudden silence of birds. Behind, another shot rang out, closer, followed by the faint whinny of horses. The cavalry had found tracks from the storm, perhaps the abandoned mount. They're quartering the ground, one warrior muttered, a stocky man named Chato, his face scarred from a Comanche lance. Won't follow deep into the slots, not on horseback. Taza wiped sweat from his eyes, the salt stinging. But they'll post watchers. We push hard, reach the draw before dark. The canyon plunged downward, walls flaring with agave blooms like yellow torches, their sap sticky underfoot. Thirst returned swiftly. The morning sips burned away by the climb, but they shared what remained in small gourds, passing them without waste. Hours ground on, the sun a white blaze overhead, dust coating throats like ash. Taza's legs burned anew, blisters forming where the lava had worn his moccasins thin, but he drew on the rhythm of the group, the soft footfalls ahead, Xochitl's steady pace setting the tempo. By mid-afternoon, the canyon bottomed out into a flat of baked clay, crisscrossed by dry washes that could flood in minutes. A hawk's cry pierced the heat, and Taza signaled a halt, pointing to fresh prints, boot marks, deep and splayed, cutting across their path. Soldiers, on foot now, scouting ahead of the main troop. Ambush? Chato whispered, knocking an arrow. Taza shook his head, calculating. Flankers. We veer east. Use the wash for cover. He cupped his hands, calling forward in a low chirp, the signal rippling up the line. The band adjusted, melting into the arroyo's bed, bodies low as they trotted along its curve. The walls muffled their steps, but the heat trapped there was stifling, air stagnant and thick, flies droning in clouds. A shout erupted behind, English curses, then the thud of boots on clay. They'd been spotted. Taza urged the rear faster, heart pounding in sync with his strides. Run light, drop if you must, but keep moving. The chase ignited, shadows of bluecoats flickering on the rim above, rifles barking sporadically. Bullets chipped stone whining past like vengeful spirits, but the wash twisted, shielding them. Xochitl's group vanished around a bend, Dago's silhouette last, bow ready. Taza fired back once, his arrow glancing off a rock, buying seconds. The run stretched, miles blurring in the haze, the desert's cruelty unrelenting, scorching sun sapping strength, dust choking breaths. But unity held them, a chain of endurance forged in blood and earth. As the wash shallowed into open scrub, the band's forms scattered toward the draw's distant promise, the soldiers' pursuit faltering in the heat. Taza glanced back, the blue line thinning, but knew the miles ahead would demand more. Rest a distant dream, survival the only path. The scrubland clawed at Taza's legs like a living thing, mesquite branches whipping his calves as he sprinted from the wash's mouth. The sun hung at its zenith, a merciless orb that turned the air into a shimmering furnace, baking the mud from the storm into a crust that cracked underfoot with every pounding step. Dust rose in choking clouds, coating his throat and stinging his eyes. But he didn't slow, his bow clutched in one hand, the other signaling Chato and the second warrior Noche to fan out. Ahead, the band's silhouettes flickered through the haze, Xochitl's steady form leading the young ones, Dago glancing back with a nod of grim resolve. The soldiers' shouts echoed fainter now, their pursuit bogged down by the heat and the treacherous ground, but Taza knew better than to trust distance. Bluecoats could push horses to death if it meant a scalp or a story for their forts. "Keep low, use the creosote," Taza hissed, dropping into a crouch as a bullet whined overhead, splintering a nearby ocotillo. The plant's segmented arms burst like fireworks, spines flying, one embedding in his forearm like a hot needle. He yanked it free, blood welling warm against the salt of his skin. But pain was just another layer to ignore. Thirst clawed deeper, his tongue a swollen lump that made swallowing feel like grinding gravel. The gourds were empty, passed forward to the elders hours ago, and the spring's memory taunted him, a cool ghost in his parched mouth. No time for pity. The draw was 3 miles off, its feathery peaks a hazy beacon on the horizon, promising jagged cover if they reached it. Chato fired from behind a boulder, his arrow slicing true into the lead soldier's mount, a bay that reared and spilled its rider into the dust. The man scrambled up, cursing in broken Spanish learned from border towns, but the delay bought them precious seconds. "They're dismounting. Won't chase fast on foot," Chato grunted, knocking another shaft, his broad chest heaving. Sweat poured down his scarred face, mixing with the red earth to form rivulets like war paint. Noche, younger and wiry, covered their flank, his knife drawn for close work, eyes darting to the rims where more bluecoats might appear. Taza pushed on, weaving through the scrub, his moccasins slapping the hardpan in a rhythm honed from boyhood, runs across these plains. The heat pressed down like a weighted blanket, sapping strength with every breath, his vision narrowing to a tunnel of survival. Memories flickered unbidden, the summer drought when he and Dago had raced antelope for miles to prove their manhood, collapsing at the finish, only to rise again at their father's command. Endurance wasn't born, it was beaten into you by the land's unyielding fist. Now, with the band stretched thin, 20 souls scattering like quail, the weight fell heavier. An elder stumbled ahead, her load of parfleshes slipping, and Taza lunged to steady her, slinging the burden over his own shoulder without breaking stride. "Lean on me, grandmother," he murmured, her frail hand gripping his arm, fingers like dry twigs. The ground rose into low swells, each crest a gamble, expose themselves or risk the thorny gullies below. They chose the dips, sliding down slopes on haunches, the friction burning through cloth. A child's cry pierced the din. One of Xochitl's charges, a girl no older than 5, her small legs failing in the heat. Dago doubled back, scooping her onto his back without a word, her arms locking around his neck as he resumed the lope. "I've got her, brother. Keep the rear clear," he called, voice strained but fierce, the cut above his eye now a purple welt that swelled with every jolt. Another volley cracked from the north, closer this time, bullets kicking up fountains of dirt that pelted like hail. One grazed Noche's thigh, tearing deerskin and flesh in a red furrow. The warrior hissed, clamping a hand over it. blood seeping between fingers, but he waved off help. "Run, I'll bind it later. Don't slow for me." Taza met his gaze, seeing the pain etched deep, the unspoken vow of the band. No one left behind, but survival demanded sacrifice. They pressed into a thicket of catclaw, the bushes hooked thorns raking arms and faces, drawing beads of blood that the sun instantly cauterized. The air thickened with the sharp, resinous bite of crushed leaves, masking their scent from the dogs the soldiers might unleash. Miles blurred in the relentless push, the sun's arc marking time as it scorched toward afternoon. Taza's lungs burned, each inhale a rasp of dry fire, his body a machine of pure will, legs pistoning, heart thundering like war drums. Thirst hallucinated tricks. Mirages of streams rippling in the distance, the imagined splash of water on his face. He bit his lip to stay sharp, tasting copper, and scanned for signs, a rattlesnake's warning buzz, the shift of wind carrying horse sweat. The soldiers faltered behind, their calls ragged, the heat wilting even their iron resolve. One by one, the band's forms funneled into a final arroyo, its banks undercut for scant shade, leading straight to Three Feathers' Draw. As they crested the draw's lip, the landscape unfolded. A labyrinth of wind-eroded spires, feathers of rock twisting skyward like petrified plumes, honeycombed with caves and fissures perfect for hiding. Eskiminzin waited at the edge, his knife drawn, directing the flow into the maze. "In, deep as you can. Taza, cover the mouth till all are through." The old man's voice cut through the exhaustion, steady as the mountains. Taza nodded, dropping his extra load and turning back with Chato and Noche. The rear group huddled in the arroyo's bend, breaths ragged, bodies slick with sweat that evaporated into nothing. "One last stand here," Taza said, positioning behind a fallen mesquite, bow ready. The soldiers crested the rise a quarter-mile off, 8 men on foot now, rifles shouldered, faces flushed under wide-brimmed hats. They fanned out, cautious, the leader barking orders to circle. Arrows flew in a deadly exchange, Chato's finding a shoulder, Taza's pinning a sleeve to scrub. The bluecoats returned fire, forcing the Apache low, but the draw's shadow swallowed the band one by one. Xochitl last, casting a fierce glance back, her basket secure. "For the young endure," she called, vanishing into the rocks. With the mouth clear, Taza signaled retreat, the trio bolting into the draw's embrace. Bullets chased them, ricocheting off stone, but the feathers' twists baffled pursuit. They plunged into a fissure, cool darkness enveloping them, the echo of their footfalls fading as they descended. Hearts pounding, limbs leaden, they regrouped in a cavernous alcove, the band's forms coalescing from shadows, huddled, spent, but whole. Eskiminzin tallied them by faint light filtering through cracks. No losses, only wounds to mend. Water was a myth now, thirst a shared demon, but gourds from hidden caches, old emergency stashes, passed hand to hand, a few sips each. Xochitl bound Noche's leg with strips of hide, her hands unerring, while Dago shared his load with the child, who clung silent now, wide-eyed at the escape. "We hold till night," Eskiminzin said, voice low. "Then south to the borderlands. The run isn't done. The soldiers will burn the trails. But we've outlasted worse." Taza leaned against the cool wall, the stone a balm on his fevered skin, watching his kin settle into watchful rest. The draw's silence wrapped them, broken only by distant echoes of the chase, a fragile sanctuary in the desert's vast throat. Endurance had carried them this far, mile after burning mile, but the final miles loomed, demanding one more surrender to the land's brutal rhythm. The alcove's chill seeped into Taza's bones like a persistent fog, the rock walls pressing close in the dimness, their surfaces rough with lichen and the faint scratches of ancient floods. Faint light trickled through fissures overhead, casting mottled patterns on the huddled forms of the band. 20 souls crammed into this natural vault, breaths shallow to conserve what little air remained. The air hung stale, thick with the mingled scents of sweat-soaked hides, blood, and the earthy damp of the stone. Outside, the soldiers' voices had faded to murmurs, punctuated by the occasional clink of metal or the snort of a horse. But the draw's labyrinth had swallowed their pursuit, leaving only echoes. Taza shifted against the wall, his back aching from the unyielding surface, the wound on his arm now a tight throb under Xochitl's bandage. She worked nearby, her fingers deft as she applied a poultice of mashed yucca root to Noche's thigh, the warrior gritting his teeth but silent, his face a mask of stoic endurance. Dago sat cross-legged beside the child he'd carried, sharing a sliver of dried venison from his pouch, the girl's small hands trembling as she nibbled. Exhaustion etched them all, eyes hollow, skin stretched taut over cheekbones, but no one complained. Complaining invited weakness, and the desert fed on that. Eskiminzin crouched at the alcove's mouth, peering into the twisting feathers of rock that guarded their sanctuary. His silhouette was sharp against the slanting rays of late-afternoon sun, the light turning the spires outside into golden blades. "They circle the draw's edge, but the heat breaks them," he said, voice a low rumble that carried no farther than the group. "Bluecoats wilt like grass in fire, won't push deep without water or night. We wait for dark, then slip south through the slot canyon. The border's 2 days' run if we pace it right." Murmurs rippled through the band, nods of agreement more than words. An elder, her hair white as bleached bones, passed a gourd carved from a hollowed agave stalk, its contents a murky slurry from the cache. Rainwater trapped months ago, now tepid and tasting of clay. Taza took a sip, the liquid sliding down his raw throat like a reluctant ally, barely quenching the fire that had built mile after mile. He passed it to Chato, who drank and wiped his mouth with a calloused hand. 2 days without rest? The little ones?" "We carry them," Xochitl interjected firmly, tying off Noche's dressing. "As we always have, share the load, share the steps. The land gives what it takes, endure, and it yields." Her eyes met Taza's, a flicker of pride cutting through the weariness. She'd run these routes before, as a girl fleeing Spanish slavers, her mother's hand in hers, learning that survival was a weave of bodies and wills, not solitary feats. As the sun dipped, shadows lengthened into the draw, the temperature plunging with the light. The band stirred, packing what little they had, baskets lashed tight, bows strung, knives sheathed. Children were bound to backs with cradle boards, their whimpers hushed by soothing hums in the old tongue. Taza helped the elder to her feet, her weight light but insistent on his arm, her grip conveying gratitude without fanfare. Dago shouldered extra gourds, his swollen eye forcing him to squint, but he moved with the quiet determination of youth tempered by trial. Eskiminzin led them out as stars pricked the velvet sky, the moon a sliver that offered scant illumination. They filed into the slot canyon, a fissure barely wide enough for 2 abreast, its floor a jumble of boulders smoothed by eons of debris. The night air bit sharp, frost already rhyming the edges of puddles from the storm, but movement warmed them, breaths fogging in the chill. Taza brought up the rear again, with Chato and Noche limping slightly, their steps measured to avoid dislodging stones that might betray them. The canyon twisted southward, walls soaring like silent sentinels, muffling the world's noise to their own footfalls and the occasional drip of condensation. Hours passed in a trance of motion, the cold sapping what heat the day had stolen. Thirst returned with the dawn's first blush, a dry rasp that made every swallow a labor. They foraged as they went, chewing on the fibrous hearts of century plants pried from crevices, the bitter pulp yielding scant moisture, but enough to stave off collapse. Taza's mouth filled with the stringy mash, his jaw aching from the effort, but he shared it with the elder, watching her chew slowly, her eyes distant with memories of leaner times. By mid-morning, the slot spat them onto open flats bordering the Pelonchillo Mountains, the horizon a ragged line of peaks that promised Mexico's wilder reaches. The sun rose fierce, turning the ground into a skillet, heat waves distorting the air like lies. No soldiers trailed them, the draw had shaken pursuit, but the land's own dangers pressed. Vast expanses of creosote and brittlebush, no shade, no water beyond what dew they licked from leaves at first light. The band strung out in a loose line, Eskiminzin setting a loping gait that conserved energy, pauses only to adjust loads or bind blisters. Taza's legs screamed, each step a fire from heel to hip, his moccasins shredded to rags that offered no protection from the sharp gravel. Sweat evaporated instantly, leaving salt rimes that chafed like sandpaper, and his vision swam with fatigue, the world tilting at edges. Yet he drew strength from the rhythm ahead, Xochitl's unyielding pace, Dago's occasional glance back with a thumbs-up signal, the children's muffled breath syncing with the group's. They ran without rest, mile after blistering mile, the title of their survival etched in every stride, Apaches who outlasted the unyielding. A distant thunderhead built by noon, dark and brooding, but it held its reign, taunting with false hope. They veered into a dry riverbed, its banks undercut for fleeting cover, the sand shifting underfoot like quicksand. An aunt faltered, her knee buckling on a hidden root, and Taza caught her, slinging her arm over his shoulders. "Lena, we've come this far," he grunted, the added weight bowing him but not breaking. Chato scouted ahead, signaling clear, his scarred face glistening under the relentless glare. As evening bled into the flats, the border's invisible line approached, a subtle shift in the land where Apache trails blurred into Mexican badlands, free from bluecoat patrols, but rife with bandits. The band crested a final rise, the Pelonchillos unfolding like a rumpled blanket, their canyons deep and inviting. No pursuit echoed. The soldiers had turned back, heat and frustration their conquerors. Eskiminzin halted at a seep hidden in a boulder cluster, its trickle a miracle after the void. They drank in turns, faces washing with relief, the water cool and pure, tasting of deep earth. Xochitl untied the girl from Dago's back, the child stumbling to the ground with a tired laugh, splashing in the shallow pool. "We made it," Dago said, voice hoarse, clapping Taza's shoulder. "Ran like the wind, miles without end." Taza nodded, sinking to his knees beside the seep, the cold stone a balm. His body was a map of aches, wounds bandaged, blisters raw, but the band's eyes met his, a circle of quiet triumph. Eskiminzin scanned the horizon, ever vigilant. "Rest here till moonrise. Then deeper south, new camps, new hunts. The run teaches, we bend but never break." In the gathering dusk, as stars wheeled overhead, the band shared the last of the venison. Stories murmured low, of this chase, of ancestors who'd run farther. Water flowed sparingly, but enough. Rest came in snatches, bodies curled against the chill. They'd run for miles without water or rest, not as myth, but as truth, resilient threads in the desert's vast tapestry, bound by land and blood, enduring into the night.